All right. How's everyone? Good evening. This is a section 2, I believe, right? This section 2, and I also teach section 3, which is right after this class. And many of them have suggested that we merge both sections into 6 to 9. They are in Seattle, so they're 3 hours behind. So their 6 to 9 is my 9 to 12. So we're trying to merge both sections together, and we're going to try out to use Google Hangout. Hello, everyone. Everybody hear me? Yeah, they're muted. Anyway, I hope you can all hear me. Hello, hello, can you hear me? There's something. All right, can you all hear me? Can somebody respond? Maybe Scott, can you respond? Can you hear me? Or somebody with a microphone?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So speak up if you have a question or if you can't see something on the screen, okay? All right, so yeah, we have some guests that are joining us today. And I'm recording this session, just like I've been recording the last couple of sessions, and I'm making them available on Piazza. Hopefully, it's of use if you find it helpful. What I'm trying to do the next couple of weeks is get you started on the project. All right. So last week we demoed a little bit on how to get started on creating a very simple web application. Yes. And I recorded that and made links available. Have you been able to look at those videos? That I've been posting on Piazza. Have they been useful? I hope they've been useful. So today I was planning on doing this, something similar. Many of you have come to me saying, well, we're finding all these web services, right? But we don't know how to access them or interact with them, how to get the data from them, right? And what should I store in the database? Should I be storing everything that I can download from these web services? Should everything be stored in the database? Should I replicate that data? And I've mostly been answering no, that you should not be replicating, right? You should be just storing enough in the database that would allow you to re-query or retrieve the information back from the remote web service, right? Perhaps some ID or some kind of identifier that you would be using as if it were a primary key onto that remote database, correct? Whether these are songs, or whether they're recipes, whether they're movies or pictures or whatever, right? You would be storing locally in your local database, a key or a primary key or some ID that the remote JSON or XML service gives you, so that you can then retrieve it later on. Does that make sense? Or that you would not be replicating or duplicating the data that is already in that remote database onto your database, right? What you would be storing in your database is things such as, if you see a product that you like, or a recipe that you like, or a sports team that you like that is stored remotely, what you would store is that perhaps user information, preferences, profile information, right? And then information things such as, right, that this user likes this sport team, or likes this thing, or they're following this particular recipe, or this particular sport, this particular movie, or whatever, right? And then what you would be doing is you would be augmenting that remote database, right, with information that is local to your particular project. That makes sense? So, a lot of you, what you're thinking of doing is perhaps adding social networking features to something that is not, it doesn't have any social networking features, right? So that you can have people follow each other or comment on certain things, right? And that information would be stored in your database, right? It cannot be stored in the remote server. Make sense? So what I'd like to demo here is how you would go about doing that. Obviously, it's going to be a very simple example, something that we could perhaps build within 3 hours. All right. So it's not going to be any sophisticated, but I think it should help you get started, right? One of the things that we need to know is, well, how do we, from Java, how do we connect to this remote service, right? Most of you that have come to me are the services that you've shown me are JSON services, right? You provide a query and it responds with some JSON object, some data that comes in JSON. Some of you are looking to do it with services that respond with XML, right? I'll do that a little later. I'll do XML, but most of you looks like you're looking at JSON web services. So I'd like to show you how you would connect to a JSON web service, right? Retrieve the JSON and then parse it locally using Java. There's another alternative that doesn't have to be Java. It could be on the client. It could be on the client side. On the client side, using JavaScript, you could do the same thing, right? You can hit the same service, retrieve it, and parse it on the client side. That I'll leave for later, right? And that perhaps we could push that a little bit off because it's that you would do if you were doing web application, and we're not doing web applications here, okay? But nevertheless, it's something that worth looking at. Okay, today I'm going to show you how to do it from Java. So that's one feature, that one aspect that we need to learn how to do, right? How do we retrieve this data from? This is the remote database. Somebody has exposed this remote database through an API, yes, and we would like to be able to access it. Right, so we'll show that. Once you access the remote database, well, how do you store data about that remote database in your local database? Yes. For instance, if you like something, or if you want to remember things, right? You need to store that in your database, right? This user likes that thing, right? So you need to have some kind of association between you as a user locally and something that lives remotely. So how do you do that in your local database? So we'll talk about that as well. So I'd like to cover those two topics. What else? I think that's enough for 3 hours. So let's anything else that you might have questions about? I think those were the two main concerns that you have come to me with. How do I do this? How do I get started talking to databases, to remote databases? Later on, what we'd like to learn how to do is, well, how do we expose our database, right? How do we expose our database so that others, third party, could hit our database and be able to access our data? I mean, how do they do it? How do they create these web services? We'll learn that a little later, okay, on how to expose our databases for third party users to access it also as JSON or XML web services. Okay. Right now, we still have our local database, and we've been interacting with it using SQL, right? Mainly SQL. We would like to be able to have other people be able to access our database. Okay, so let's start working on this. Any questions before we get started? All right. Okay. All right. So let's. Any question from Seattle? No. All right. I'm gonna get Eclipse started. So here's Eclipse, and this is the Eclipse that we were working on last week. I believe we worked on something like an online IDE. Right now, what I want to be able to do is hit a weather service, right? Something like you have on maybe on your iPhone or your smartphone, where you can look up weather. It's presumably hitting some online service, right? And it's downloading that information and then displaying it locally, right? And you can create, for instance, your favorite. You could create. You have a little database on the phone that says, these are the cities that I care about. I mean, there's many zip codes, but these are the only 3 or 4 zip codes that I care about. So that I need to store locally on a local database, yes? And there might be, if the phone would allow to have multiple users, you might have maybe multiple users having multiple likes, right? So user 1 has these three zip codes, and user 2 has these other 4 zip codes, yes? And each one needs to be stored in the local database. You know, who likes what zip codes or what? So that's stored in the local database. Then the zip code is what we could use as the ID, right? That we use to retrieve the information from a weather service, yes? And we could query the weather service and say, well, give me the weather for today and maybe the next couple of days. That's what I'm saying, that not to store or copy that information in your local database, just store the zip code, right? Whenever you want to retrieve that zip code, you would then use the web service to retrieve that information again. But you would not replicate that in your local database. Make sense? The only thing you would store is a zip code. It may be a label, right? Maybe the name of the city, or maybe an icon or an image or a thumbnail or something. Yes? Let me shut off my phone. Okay. So let's create here a simple web project, new dynamic web project, and I'll call it weather app. Okay. I'll go next. Again, this is using Java. Perhaps next week I can show you how to do it from the client, right? Using JavaScript instead. We also need to know, well, how do you do it using XML, right? Which is just another technique. Let's look at this. So let's say finish, and let's make sure that we're running. Let's create just here a small hello world page. Make sure that we're up and running. Hello. And I'm just going to say hello. H1. Hello. We run that on the server. Make sure that we have a server running. Say next. Yes. All right, so hello is working. All right, so we have a web application. We can hit it with a real browser. Okay, so it is working. Okay, it's a little hello world. Very good. All right, so where do we get this web service? So many of you have gone to, as I had suggested, to a website that I suggested to you called Programmable Web. Programmable Web is one of many websites that have repositories of APIs, okay, of RESTful APIs, okay, and many of you have found some of these websites, some of these RESTful APIs. I found one, and I created this is the URL that I found. Okay, this is the URL that I found. Okay, if I copied it on my browser, right, and I paste it here, it's a URL. The only thing that's weird about this is that it has a key, right? There's a key that usually you apply to that particular web service provider. So I want to participate. I want to be able to use your API. Here's my email. Please provide me with a key. Usually they ask you what are you going to use it for, and that you describe what you're going to build, right? And an email so that they can contact you, and also they explain you can't do more than 100 requests per minute or something. They give you some kind of limitations on how to use this, right? And then they provide some parameters that you can provide on how you configure the request that you make it, right? So for instance, this is a weather service. You can provide a zip code. I can provide 01827. The format that you want, you can ask it if maybe it's XML or JSON or whatever format that you want. Other parameters that my API allows me to do is, it's a weather service. How many days forecast do I want? Okay. If I click on this and I submit it. Oops, sorry. Let me paste it again. Here's the zip code. 01827. There it is. So it comes back with text, right? It comes comes back as text. If I look at the source, this is the real text that comes back, right? This is just plain text, right? But it's formatted. It's formatted in a way. There's a very standard format, right? It's called the JSON format, right? It's called the JSON format stands for JavaScript object notation. So it's an object. It's an object notation. If you have a plugin installed in Chrome that pre-prints my JSON. When it detects that it's JSON format, it pre-prints it this way, so that it allows me to view it in some sensible way, right? So, for instance, it allows me to toggle. This is very much like if you've used IE, right? And you open up XML documents, right? It allows you to view it, and you can collapse the various XML nodes. So what's in here? Let's see. This bracket over here says that this is an object, and that it has one attribute, right? Objects in JavaScript are basically name-value pairs. Name, value, name, value, name, value, name, value, right? This is the name, data, and this is the value, right? And it's delimited by a colon, right? The left-hand side of the colon is the property or attribute, and the right-hand side is the value of that property. Yes? Very much maybe like a Java object where you have your variables inside of a class are the properties, right? And then the value of that property is the value of that property, right? So same thing here. So here's a property, and that's the value. The value is what? Another object, right? I can close that. The object, if I close this, notice that at the top level there's only one property with one value, right? This is the value, okay? And that property has an object which, again, has three other properties. So there's another object. There it is, right? The value of this property is another object that has three properties, right? Three properties: current conditions, request, and weather. Each one of these properties has their own value, right? The value of this property is an array. You see the square brackets? It means that the value of this property is an array. And this property also is an array, and this property is the value is also an array, right? And I can expand it and say, okay, well, the array is made up of just one element. The first element of that array is an object, right? If I open it, that object has a whole bunch of properties. Okay, it has cloud cover, humidity, observation time, and so on and so forth, right? Two of these properties are arrays themselves. So this one is the weather description, partly cloudy, and the weather icon, the image that you can use to render that image. It's cloudy. Okay? That makes sense? Right? So what we need to do here is know, well, I know how to do it if I paste the URL on the browser. Well, how do I do this programmatically, right, from code? I need to be able to hit this URL programmatically from Java, right? And then extract this data and somehow parse this. Right, make this available. Notice that this hierarchical, this kind of like a very hierarchical data model, right? This is very much like this would be perhaps a record, right? A record where you have data, and that record has several fields that are named current conditions, request, and weather. Each one having several instances, meaning they're related to some other data, right? So you could just imagine how this could be mapped to a relational model, right? Where these hierarchies would be represented in a table using foreign keys, right? You would have to have different tables for each one of these object instances, yes, right? You have records separated in a normalized relational model. Right, but anyway, we don't want to have to know how we would map this. We just want to be able to retrieve this. But this is one of many ways of representing data. The one that we've been looking up to this point is a relational model on how you represent data. Yes. We haven't yet seen the object model. How Java or C# or C++ right represent data. Right, they represent it in an object-oriented way. Right. But it is one of many object models, right? And they have to be somewhat, you should be able to map between these two worlds. How do you map an object model to a relational model, right? And that's an open question we haven't yet tackled, right? Today we'll do a little bit of it. Right? We're going to say, well, we have this data model that we're downloading from, we're downloading from this URL. Somehow we have to map this information, perhaps in data, right, into some tables, into some relational database. Okay. We haven't yet gone into that issue. When we're going to look at object relational mapping, we will tackle that issue, right? Object relational mapping is the techniques that we would need to map these two worlds, the relational to the object world, right? That's why it's called ORM, right? Object relational mapping. How do you map objects to the relational world and backwards, right? From the relational world back to the object. How do you map these two worlds? We haven't just yet tackled that, right? Here, this JSON object that we have is a form of object-oriented representation, right? Some hierarchical representation of objects nested within each other. All right, so let's get a hold of this. Let's create here. Let's create here a class that we're going to use to hit that URL. Okay, let's create a class here. Let's put it inside of a package. We'll call it maybe edu.neu.cs5200, and we'll call this the weather. Okay, and in here the package, the name of the class, we'll call it maybe weather JSON web service client. Okay. So we are going to write a Java class that is a client to this service, right? This URL is providing a service to us. Yes, it's providing a web service. Right? It's expected to be accessed through HTTP. So we're gonna create this web service, which is going to be a client to this URL. Make sense? We're gonna be reading this data. Let's make a main so we can run it locally. Say finish. So there it is. All right, so we have main. Let's see if we can run this. Make sure that we can run this. So system.out.println hello world. Okay, let's run this. It says locally as a Java application, and it's going to write it in the console. Hopefully, there it is. Hello. Okay, so we can run this standalone. All right. Okay. All right. So let's create this weather JSON web service client. Now, what we want to be able to do is, have a function maybe that says, get an object weather. If I give it, get weather for zip, right? And I give it a string, a zip code. Basically, that's what I want, right? I want some method, right, that if I give it a zip code, it'll come back with an object representation of the weather. Okay? Notice that we don't have a weather object. We could create one. We can say weather, create weather, class. Inside of the same package, I'm going to say finish. There is weather. So here is going to be our Java object representation of whatever this JSON thing comes back with. Okay? So what do we have in this object that we might want to capture? We don't have to capture verbatim, right? What we have here. Okay? For instance, notice that it's wrapping this thing instead of a data attribute, right? We don't have to capture the data, right? We might want to capture these things. Let's see. Definitely, I want to capture the current conditions. Okay, the current condition looks like it's an array of what? Of cloud cover, humidity, and temperature, and weather icons, and whatnot. Let's see this weather over here. It looks like it's an array of what? Of two objects, right? Two objects. It looks like because it's what the forecast, right? I asked it for 2 days forecast, so it looks like it gave me back two objects. Each one looks very similar. Look at that. It looks very, very similar, right? The temperature, right, and the wind direction. Very similar to what we have up here, right? The weather description, right? The icon, same thing. The wind direction. So it looks like we could. Well, maybe actually we have temperature max in Celsius and Fahrenheit. Over here, what do we have? We have temperature just in Celsius. So because these are current conditions, right? So we could do perhaps what we could do is maybe call this, each one of these, maybe a condition object, right, where we can put here temperature and icons and things like that in the description, right? Looks like, and we can reuse it for both of these, right? This could be an array of conditions, right, or a list of conditions, and this would be just one condition for today, or the current condition. Make sense? Right? So in the weather, we might want to capture, let's see, what do we want to capture here? Maybe we want to capture a private string, maybe a name for the location name. Maybe we want to capture maybe an ID, a unique ID, if this ever we want to store it in a database. So this could be like a primary key. Maybe we would have also here the zip code for which we are capturing the data, right? And the weather, we might have maybe a current condition, a current condition for current conditions, and then maybe a list of conditions, right? For the forecast. Okay, so this condition is going to represent that object here. Okay, and the weather over here is going to be representing the list of conditions, one for each day. Everybody okay? All right. Okay. Let's see. What do we have to do? Okay, we need to import the list from Java UTIL, and condition doesn't exist, so I'll create the condition class in the same location, right, in the same package. So condition, right? Condition is going to have what? It's going to have all these attributes, right? What we want to do is capture this text here. If you don't have the plugin, to view the JSON, there's a really nice online JSON viewer. It's called, I believe it's called JSON Online, JSON Editor Online.org. That if you paste on the left-hand side the JSON, you can click here to pre-print it, right? And then if you click on this button, it gives you a nice tool that allows you to browse or manipulate the object on the right-hand side. Okay. So for instance, one of the things that I want to do here is copy these names, current condition, and the object in here. What do we have here? Let's see. What do we have? We have cloud cover, so let's copy that. And that looks like it's a number. I don't know if it's cloud cover, that should be an integer or a float. I'm not sure. So I'm going to represent it as a float in my Java. Okay? So I'm going to say float cloud cover. And for brevity's sake, I'm going to make this all public. Is that okay? So I don't have to use setters and getters for this condition. Right? What else we have? Humidity. I'm going to assume that's also a float, right? For each one of these, okay. I'm not going to do all of them because we're short on time. The one I really want is this one, the description. The description looks like it's in here. I'm going to capture here description, weather description. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put it here. It looks like I'm going to use a string for that. Weather description, and then I want to capture also the weather icon. Okay, URL. So this also I'm going to say use a string to capture that. What else? And there's a whole bunch of things that I'm not going to capture right now. If we find that we need to capture other things, I'll copy them later. Everybody okay? Right? All right. Condition. Let's go to weather. I think I'm okay here. I'm going to save this. Let's go back to weather client. This is complaining, saying that I'm not returning anything. So I'm just going to say return null, just so that this at least compiles. Okay, get weather for client. All right. So how do we get this URL? Well, we need the URL pattern. Where's the URL? That's the URL. I'm going to copy it here. I'm going to copy it here as a public static public string. Well, maybe it should be private, right? Private string URL API, right? So I'm going to paste it in here. Okay. Everybody okay? It's just the same URL that I used to hit the the web browser. Yes, we want to do the same thing from within Java, right? So let's do that. Let's see. Let's see what we could do. We could say what we could do is first replace the zip code here. See the zip code? We're going to replace it with the zip that we're being passed as an argument. Okay? To have the new URL API. Yes? So we're going to say string URL string is going to be URL API replace URL if I spell it right. Replace this placeholder zip. I'm going to replace it with the zip variable that I got earlier. Yes? Right? And just to make sure, I'm going to print it to verify that this works. URL string. Okay, let's run it. Oh, I never called it, right? I need to create an instance of the web JSON web client. I'm going to create an instance. And then I'm going to say client dot get weather for zip 01827. Let's run that. There it is. That's the URL that came back. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go into my browser. I'm going to start brand new. Right. I'm going to paste it. Okay, that works. Okay. The URL works. Right. All right. So I need to programmatically do it from Java. To do that, we're going to use URL. I'm going to create a URL variable. New URL. I'm going to pass it the URL string. Okay. URL is a Java class that represents URLs. Right. It parses it and makes sure that it's a valid URL. Right. That it doesn't have any syntax errors. Okay. All right. So I'm going to say I'm going to include URL from java.net. There it is. And it also is complaining saying that this throws an exception. So I'm going to say I'm going to put a try catch around that. Right. What I want to be able to do is I want to start a connection. I want to say URL open connection. Right. And does this throw an exception? Yes. So I'm going to add to existing catch clause surround. Add catch clause to surrounding try. Okay. Right, so we added that too. This is going to return. This returns a generic connection, right? What I want to have I want an HTTP connection. Right? I want to treat it as an HTTP connection, not as a generic connection. So HTTP HTTP URL connection. Oh, there it is. URL connection. So this is my connection. Right? Oops, what's it saying? So the idea is, oh, it's been deprecated. Really? Oh, HTTPS? No, it's just HTTP. Let me import that. Okay, I imported it, and it is complaining saying that I need to cast it. So I'm going to cast it. All right, there it is. It cast it. Now it has a connection. Now I need to say, well, what do you want to do? You want to remember that there's various types of HTTP connections, right? I could do a put, I could put a delete, I could do a post, I could do a get. There's many types of connections, right? I need to tell it what type of connection do I want, right? So I can say connection set connection get set connection instance request method. There it is. Request method. So what type of request method is? It's a get. So we say I want to get HTTP connection. Right. Now that I know that it's a request method, right? We're actually going to open up a stream. Right. We're going to start streaming, right, the content from the remote site. Right, we can say connection get input stream. right? We're going to get an input stream. So we're going to say input stream equal connection stream. And I need to import the input stream from Java IO. There it is. Okay. And now this input stream, we're going to need to buffer it, right? It's going to be streaming, right? It's a good idea to put it inside of a Java buffer, right? As it's reading it, because we're going to read it line by line, right? We're going to read it line by line, right? Concatenate it into a string that we're gonna then want to parse that string. Okay. So we're gonna create a buffer stream buffered input stream. There it is. This is a buffer. There'll be a new buffered input stream that takes as an argument the stream that we have. Okay, and now this will allow us to read line by line. Right? I want to read up until the character turn and just keep reading. Right. So basically, what we're going to do, we're going to read it into a string. Each line we're going to read it into each string. So here's a line. Right. I want to read that. While as I am reading, so buffer dot read line or get isn't read line in here? Read line, read. I thought there was a line, get line. Am I using the right one? Maybe I'm not using the right stream. Let me look at my cheat sheet. Where is it? That's not it. Buffered reader. It is buffered reader. It is buffer reader. Oh, I missed this one. I missed this step. Missed that step. Here's this input stream. There's the input stream reader, and then there's the buffer. Okay, let's import that from Java IO. And buffered reader. I thought we imported that. Okay, right? All right, so okay, now we can say buffer dot read line. There it is, read line. Okay, so we're going to read line until there's no more lines to read. Okay, and so we're going to put it inside of a while loop. We're going to say while, as long as line, we're going to read into the line buffer read line, right? As long as this is not null. As long as that is not null, we're just going to keep appending. Right? We're going to keep appending each line that we read. We're going to keep appending it to the line. Okay. So we're going to say line dot buffer read. So we can have line. Where's the append? Where's the append over here? Let's write it out. Let's see if we can. Let's see what we get here. We say system.out. Let's print each one of these lines. Let's see what we get back. Line. All right, let's run this again. There it is. There's a text. You see the text? That is the text that we wanted, right? That is the JSON, the same exact JSON that we got earlier, right? If I paste it here in my JSON editor, if I paste it and I pre-printed, and it's the same JSON object that we got here, right? So we have it as a string. We have it as a string, right? Right? We can just say that we can append line the JSON string JSON here equal empty here. We're going to say JSON plus equal line, right? And then we're going to system print the whole thing, system.out println JSON. Run this again. Okay, let's make sure that JSON that came back is sound. Let's paste this. Let's pre-print it. There's no errors, and it can be parsed. Very good. Looks like we have now the string. Is everybody okay? Obviously you don't need to copy any of this, right? It's recorded online, and it's also I'm going to share the code in GitHub, and also feel free to reuse any and all parts of this, okay, in your own particular projects. All right? Okay. All right. Now we have the JSON. Now we have the JSON string as a string, but we need to parse it. Okay. Now to parse it, there's tons of parsers out there. All right. I'm going to use a very, very simple JSON parser, which is called JSON Simple Parser. Okay. I downloaded it. You can look it up here. It's if you just look up for JSON Simple Parser, right? You can download it from Google, right? It's just basically a jar file. You can download. It's basically a jar file, right? What I did is I downloaded the jar file. I have a local copy on my file system. I have it. Where do I have it? I have it in my C drive. I have JSON, and in here, there it is. There it is. JSON simple jar file. Yes? All right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to include it in my project. I'm going to drag the .jar file into my project. I'm going to drag it. We might need it on the client side from JSP. So just in case, I'm going to drag it in there. I'm going to drop it in my lib directory. I'm going to drop it in my lib directory and say copy. It could be a link, but I'm going to copy it so that it's a standalone application. It doesn't need jar files from outside. Yes? Okay. And because I definitely need it from my Java side, my classes, right? I'm going to add it to my build path. I'm going to say configure build path. I'm going to go to my libraries. I'm going to add not external jars. I want to add a jar that is local to my project. Okay. So if I click on add jars, and I can browse to where I dropped my jar file. I dropped it inside of my lib. There it is. Right? I'm going to say OK. Right? So it's just referencing a jar file that is local to the project, right? As opposed to maybe a jar file that is hosted in another project, or a jar file that is hosted in any place in the file system. So this is all going to be a self-contained project, right? Which you should be able to just download it, right? The project, and just replicate this in your own machines. Okay. All right. So I'll say okay. All right. Great. So the way this works is that I want to be able to parse that JSON. I want to parse it into objects, right? And create a weather instance and a condition instance, right? That has lists of conditions so that I can render it and maybe store it in my database. Okay. Is everybody okay? All right. All right. Great. So let's go back here. I want to parse that object. I'll parse that object using a JSON parser. New JSON parser. Right. This JSON parser is one of the classes in the newly jar file that I just added. Okay. It's inside. Notice that it found it. It's in org JSON simple parser. Right. I include that. Now I have a parser. Right. And now that I have a parser, I can say parser dot parse, right? And I can provide it the string that I just parsed. I could have instead of creating the string here, what I could have instead is I could have given it the stream, meaning, hey parser, you read it directly from the stream, right? And parse it as you're reading it from the stream. That could have been nicer instead of having the string, the actual string, right? You could have done that, but I have the string here. I can say take the JSON string, right? And this it's complaining. Let's see what it's complaining about. It says that this can throw an exception, so I'm going to surround it with a try catch. There it is. So it's fine. What this returns now we need to go back to the schema and look what it returns. What does it return? It returns an object. There it is. See, it doesn't return an array. Right? It doesn't return a JSON array. It returns a JSON object. Okay. So we need to say, okay, parse it, and this is going to return a JSON object, right? Which is the root. Okay. It's going to return this object here, that object there. Okay. That object, which contains one single property called data. Okay. All right. That's the root. And this is complaining, saying that I need to import that. Perhaps there it is. So I'm going to import it. Also, it's complaining, saying that I'd only return an object. So you need to cast it to a JSON object. There it is. I casted it. Instead of this print here, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to print the actual root. Let's see what the actual root is. All right? Okay, so let's run this again. Notice that it prints the same exact thing. You see that? So this is after I parsed it, this is what I understand. This is what I parsed, and I understand that this is what it represents. Right? So it did not die. So presumably it was able to parse it. It has an object representation in it. Now we have to extract the pieces that we want. Okay. For instance, I don't care about the data. Right? So I'm going to parse that out. I'm going to say JSON object data is from the root. I want to get the property called data. Okay, so get the property called data, which happens to be what? Another object. This data is an object, right? Okay, so notice that I am putting it in data that is a JSON object. I need to cast this. I need to cast it to JSON object. There it is. Now I have data. Now notice that if I print data, let's print data. I run this now. Notice that data now is, I got rid of data, right? Because I am printing data. What does data contain? It contains three things, right? It contains current condition. There it is. There's current condition, right? It contains request and weather. So somewhere here we should have request and weather way down here somewhere. Well, I can't find it. No problem. We can parse it out, right? What are these? What are these? These are current condition is a property, request, and whether each one is a property of the data object. Yes. What type are they? They are arrays, right? They are arrays. So I need to say, hey data, get me. Is it current condition? There it is. I got the current condition. And what is it? It's an array, right? It's a JSON array, which happens to be called current condition. Right? I'm storing it in a local variable called current condition. So I don't know yet what to do with it. Okay, but at least I have an object representation of it locally in my system. I need to include JSON array, import it. And this might throw an exception, so I need to cast it to JSON array. There it is. Let's print the current condition. Let's print current condition. Run that. Notice that current condition is an array. There it is, right? Let's verify. It says it is an array. An array of what? Of a single object. An array that has one element, single object, whose first element of that object, first property of that object is cloud cover. There it is. See, an array of an object whose first attribute or property is cloud cover. Everybody still with me? Right? Do you see how the pattern is? Right? You parse it, right, and then you start extracting the various pieces that you need. Right? We haven't yet created the weather object. Right? We haven't done that yet. Yes? We're gonna have to put this in a condition, right? Inside of a condition. Well, let's do that. What else do we need? Let's see. Okay, that's the current condition. What's this request? Well, the request just says, the thing that you passed me, right? You passed me this zip code. So this is kind of like echoing what we passed. So I don't care about that because I know what I passed, right? So I don't need to parse that out. I do need to parse these two, right, as an array. All right, we could do that a little later. But let's look at current condition. Let's focus on current condition here. Let's parse each one of these. So okay, what do you want? I want the first element of the. Actually, do I want the weather? Yeah, let me get the weather. I don't care about the request, but let me get the weather here. So I'm going to extract the weather here. So and the weather itself is an array. So here's JSON array weather. It's a JSON array. Data.get weather with other. Right, I need to cast this. And now I have the weather, which is an array. Oh, did I even spell it? Can't spell today. Okay, so now I have these two represent what? Represent this one and that one. Everybody okay? Right, I'm going to focus on this current condition so that I can at least create one of these guys, this condition over here. All right? Okay. So let's do that. And each one of these, I have 3 floats and a string and 2 strings. Yes. So let's extract those pieces. Let's extract those pieces from the current condition. Let's extract it here. I'm going to say I'm going to create my object condition current condition. Right. So this is a non-Java name, right? Java doesn't care for underscores. We prefer in Java to use camel casing. Yes. So here I'm going to use a Java name for a variable for a Java class, right? So I'm going to create a brand new instance, new condition, and I'm going to populate each one of these current conditions. Current condition dot cloud cover. I want to extract that. Yes, I want to extract that. So how do I extract it? Well, I have current condition in the JSON. I'm going to say dot get. Well, actually, I want the current condition. I want the first element, right? The first element. So actually, let me do that first, right? I want the first element because current condition is the whole thing, is the array. Yes, it's a whole array. I really want the first object in that array. Right? That's really the object that I want. What do I call it? JSON object. I don't know. It's CC for current condition. Oh, I hate that name. But this name has been taken already. Gru. And this name has been taken too. Fine, I'll bite the bullet. CC. You'll know what I mean, right? It's the first object in that array. Right? The first object in that array. How about that? First object. First condition. How's that? First condition is current condition. Current condition. Basically, I want to get the first elements, right? The 0th element, right? It's this one. It's the first element. It's an object, meaning that this is an object, right? This has to get 0. There it is, right? I have first condition. Now that I have the first condition, now I can parse each one of these elements, right? Everybody okay? Did I lose anyone? Was that confusing? I'm going to go over that again. Is everybody okay? Can we go on? Okay. All right. Now I have the first condition. Fine. I want to get the cloud cover, right? Cloud cover, which is a literal, right? What is it? It's going to return. The only thing that it returns is a, let's see, it returns an object. I know it's a float, right? It's a number, right? So I should be able to parse it into a float, right? So first, let me convert it to a string. Oh, wait a minute, what's this? This complaining. This needs to be converted into a JSON object. Okay, let me cast it. Very good. This I'm going to convert it into a string, to string. Now that I have a string representation, I should be able to parse that string into a number, right? And I know it's an integer or a float. I'm going to parse it into a float. So I'm going to use float dot parse float, so I can parse any string into a float. Well, not any string. It better be a string that can be parsed into a float. Otherwise, it'll throw an exception, right? And now notice that I'm assigning it to cloud cover, which can hold a float. Everybody okay? Let's verify that indeed cloud cover is equal to what? In this case, it's 0. Well, that doesn't help. Let's do with pressure. Let's do pressure. Let's do the same thing, but with pressure. Pressure, and which is non-zero. Okay. Now we can print out. We can print just to make sure. We can say current condition dot pressure. Let's print pressure just to see if we were able to parse that pressure out. Okay. Let's do that. Let's run this, and hopefully it'll come back with what? 1013. All right, let's run it. Let's run it. There it is, 1013. So yes, we are able to extract all these pieces, right? Let's do just a couple more, and then we can continue. Condition, we have humidity, and then we have these other ones, right? So let's do humidity. One more for humidity. So we have humidity, and what else do we have here? Condition. We have these description, weather description, and icon URL, right? So those are down here, right? And they are arrays. Yes, they are arrays. They're kind of like generic arrays. I really don't care about the array. I care about the first element of that array that has the string, right? Okay. So let's do that. Let's get the array for let's get the array for the description. So let's say JSON array. What's it called? It's called weather description array. And from where? From current condition, right? Current condition. Get weather description. Right? And I really want what? The object down here, right? This object. So I'm going to get, it's the first element, so I can say JSON object, the actual weather description object is going to be weather array at the first element. Get 0, the first element of that array. Yes? This is complaining. Yes? I think weather description is inside of. Oh, yes, you're right. It's from first condition. Thank you. First condition. Yes, first condition. Thank you for that. Let me cast this. I need to cast this as well. Cast that. Now I have the description. Now that I have the description, finally I can extract from weather description. I can extract what? I want to extract the value of that object. Right? So I can say current condition dot weather description is going to be equal to weather description get the value dot get value. Okay, and that I need to do it to string to convert it into a string. All right. Right, and same thing I need to do with what? The icon. I want the icon, which is down here, right? And it's an array. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to copy this for brevity. So it's icon URL. So it's icon URL array. Icon URL. And then here's the URL object, 0. And then the URL I can just extract from here the value, and I can put it here. I believe that's what I call in the current condition, right? And just to verify that we got the condition, let's print the URL. Let's print the URL here. All right, let's run this. Clear? Oh, did I do this wrong? Weather icon, first condition, URL. Oh, I used the wrong array. I hate computers. They always do exactly what they're told. Never what I mean. Okay, let's turn back. Okay, there's a URL. Let's copy that URL, make sure that that is indeed a valid image. Yeah, it's an image, right? So it's clear sky night. That's an image that they have in their database. Okay. All right, so we have a condition, right? We have a condition. We are ready, right? We are ready. Well, we still have to do the weather, right? Let's do that a little later. Well, let's at least for right now. All right, let's not print that. Okay, maybe I can leave that for you to do later. Here's weather. This is the weather object. It's going to be new weather, and let's create here a couple constructors for the weather, right? How about we're going to need, is it okay if I put this all public? No. You shouldn't do that. So let's make all the setters and getters. There they are. Current condition, say okay. No, I don't want this. Yes, okay. All right. Then I need constructors. Let's create a couple of constructors here. Constructors. Not constructors. Yeah, constructor for all of them. Then another constructor with no ID. And then a constructor with a default constructor using fields, none of these, right? Usually you want three types of constructors: no arguments, one with all the arguments including the ID, and the other with all the arguments but no ID. Okay. Wait, did I say that twice? One with an ID and one with no ID. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's go here and go back to my client. I created the new weather, right? I don't have an ID, but I do have, let's see, what do I have here? I do have location name. Well, I don't have a location name. Maybe, perhaps we can put that later. I do have the zip. Let's see, what other constructors do I have? I have location name. So let's try here and say I want location name. I need to save that. I'll put this is my town, zip 01827, and then what are the other arguments? We have zip current conditions. We have that, right? We just created that. We just created the current conditions, so we can pass that as an argument, right? As a parameter. And I don't have the other, right, the forecast. So I'm just going to pass null for now. Is that okay? All right, so now I have the weather object, and that's what you were waiting for, right? I'm just going to return it. Return weather object. That's what you were asking for, right? And that's it. If this fails and it goes into a try-catch block, I'm going to return null. Okay? Everybody okay? All right, so now I have a weather service. I have something that I can call and extract a weather service. Everybody okay? Right? What I want to be able to do is, for a given zip code, for a given user, perhaps, I want to be able to create a mapping between users and zip codes, right? So perhaps I want to have a list of my favorite cities and zip codes, right? And that's my database. So I need a database to hold users. I need a database to hold zip codes. And well, what about if you have multiple users using the same zip code, right? Would I have what's the best way? I could perhaps just capture the zip code only once, right? If many users are using the same zip code, I would not have inserted zip codes many times, right? That would be redundant, right? Instead, what I'm going to do is going to have like a mapping table in between saying, you know, these users are using these zip codes, right? So I'm going to store the zip code only once. You know, same thing you would do perhaps if you're using a recipe or sports team or some product, right? And you have multiple users liking a product or adding it to their shopping cart, right? What you do is you create some kind of mapping table, right, that would let you keep track of which users like what products, right? Same thing if you have people following other people, right? You might have one person being followed by many users, right? So again, you would have a mapping table that would map perhaps a user with itself, right? So you would have one user table and then a mapping table that says, well, this user maps, is following that other user. So you might have two foreign keys pointing to the same table, right? It's like a self-referencing, right, table, right, that is linking to itself, right? That's creating some kind of hierarchy, some kind of graph, saying that I follow you, you follow them. It's kind of like a graph, right? And you can generate this this hierarchy of who's following what. It's this network of people following each other. Right? Make sense? Right? So let's keep going. All right. So for that, we would like to have a database, right, that would allow us to create these things, right? So let's create first a database that allows us to create a user, right? Create a user. Also, we need also create zip codes and then the relationship between the two. All right, so let's go to Toad. So I have I don't remember if I have do I have this running? Oh, I think it's not running. Yeah, let me start MySQL. Okay, why is the happens to my start menu? My window key is not working. Why is that? Hello? What? Hello? Oh, there you are. Why didn't it come up? Interesting. Okay, whatever. Let me start a command line and start MySQL. Oh, that's not what I want. Sorry. MySQL D. Okay, it's running, and I'm going to go back to Toad and try to connect to my database. And are you alive? Hello? Hello? Something's wrong with my machine. Let me kill Toad. Sorry, Toad. Oh, did you come back? It's alive. Wait, what? It quit on me. All right, let me restart Toad. Toad. Okay, there it is. It's starting, and I'm going to connect to my MySQL database. It scared me. No, I don't want to install my updates. I'm going to connect to the database, and I'm going to create a new schema. So let's see, schemas. Where are schemas? Databases. There it is. So I'm going to say new. So I'm going to call the weather app. Okay. And to distinguish this from section 3 that I'm going to have to run right after this, I'm going to call this section 3, right? And oh no, wait, this is section 2. Sorry, this is section 2, right? Yes, section 2. Sorry, section 2. I'll say okay. All right. So in the database is down here. There it is. And I'm going to create a table here. I'm going to create a table, one for my users. Right, so I'm going to say my user table, and the columns in here are going to be ID. That's going to be my primary key. A couple other things that I might want in here is what? Let's see. Maybe a username. Maybe a username as a varchar, and I'm going to add maybe. Oops, no, I don't want that. And then I want maybe a password, perhaps. Maybe, and I want this to be a varchar too. And maybe this, I want maybe an email. How's that? Varchar. And the email, each one of these I'm going to make 50. 50. I'm going to make this 50. And this one 50 as well. Okay? You have a question? Any questions? No? Then I'm going to put in my general, I'm going to say that my primary key is going to be that ID over there. This is my ID. And say OK. And I'm going to say that that ID, I want it to be auto increment. I don't want to have to deal with the ID of updating or creating these IDs. I want it to auto increment. And say true. And I'm going to say OK. Oops. What's it complaining about? Access denied. What? Root localhost. Cancel. What? Interesting. Create table. Dummy table. ID. Okay. Huh. Let me just kill Toad. Something's wrong. Oh, I didn't select the schema. Wait, I thought I did, didn't I? Did I select the schema? I didn't. Okay. You'd think that having created that schema, it would by default put me in that schema, right? Okay, tables. Let's try that again. Dummy. Int. Okay. All right, that works. Okay, whatever. Let me create my new user table again. Sorry. User columns will be ID. ID. I'm going to say that this is not null, and it's a primary. It's an auto increment. Then I'm going to create a username, a varchar, and I'm going to create then a password, varchar, and I'm going to create email, varchar, and I'm going to general. I'm going to say that that ID that I had earlier is going to be my primary key. I say OK. I'm going to create that. Okay, that works. Okay, I have user. And now I'm going to store the locations, right, that I want to remember, right? If I want to remember the zip code, I need to add it somewhere. I need to be able to remember the zip code, right? Also, if I'm going to give it a name or a description, or I'm going to put a picture on it or something, anything that I need to remember about that location, I need to create here a table for it, right? So I'm going to put here the name of the table. I'm going to call it weather, okay? And my columns are going to be an ID for my primary key, right? That's going to be my auto incremented. I'm going to say yes, and it's a not null. I'm going to add a couple things here. I'm going to create maybe a zip code. That's going to be a varchar. I'm going to add. Also, I'm going to add. Let's see what else. Location name. Maybe I want to give it a name for the location. Yes. That's going to be a varchar. What else? I'm going to go back to my general. I'm going to say that my primary key is going to be that ID. Okay, and I believe I set it to auto increment, didn't I? Yes, I did. Okay, there it is. So yeah, so here's my weather. So this is going to be my weather for various zip codes. Yes, and so different users are going to have different. Are going to be posting that they're following these particular zip codes. Yes. All right. So let's create a mapping table that says these users are following those zip codes. Okay. So let's do that. Let's do a create table, and we're going to call it user to weather. Right. So this is a mapping table that maps these two tables. That says here's a column and says that this is the user ID, which is an integer, and it's going to have the weather ID, Okay, so it's going to have, these are going to be two foreign keys, right? And so it says that user over there, whose primary key is so-and-so, is following that zip code over there, right? And there could be multiple mappings between user and weather, right? So what I want to be able to do is say that this is going to have a constraint. It's going to say that this is going to be the user ID, right? It's going to say that I want to map to another column. I'm going to map the user ID column. I want to map it to another table. I want to map it to the user table, right? And it automatically detects that, well, you must be wanting to map to the primary key on that table, right? And I want to add another foreign key constraint saying that this will be my weather foreign key. Let's give it a name, foreign key. Okay. And that maps my weather ID to that other table, the weather table, right? And it automatically understands that you mean the primary key of that other table, right? Let me change the name of the user ID. Just say that this is a foreign key constraint. Okay, make sense? All right, I'm going to say OK. Say OK. All right, there it is. There it is. So this table maps these users to those weathers. Everybody okay? right? So for instance, if I create a user here, right, and I say, I want to say this is Alice, and password is also Alice, and the email is alice@wonderland.com, right? And then I have perhaps another user, and I might have this is Bob, password Bob, and this is Bob@Marley.com. And then I might have different weather, right? I might have perhaps a zip code 01827, and this is Dunstable. And then I might have perhaps 10701. Oops, 10701, and that's Yonkers, New York. Yonkers. Okay. I might have and say that if I want to make a relationship, I might say that user 1, which is Alice, right, is following Yonkers 2. Make sense? Oops, I have a constraint. Dynamic generator is not supported, blah, 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 blah. Does not return any key column information. Do not want to keep your changes, blah, blah, blah. You can edit them. Yes. Huh. Wait a minute. How many weather do I have? So I go to weather. If I go to weather, I have 1 and 2. Yes? And weather, what's it complaining about? The user ID. User. Oops. User ID is 1. And this is complaining about what? It says 1. Dynamic SQL generation for the update command is not supported against select command that does not return any key column information. No. Okay, let me blow that away. With something, I must have done something wrong. Let me alter this. Perhaps it wants a primary key. Let's add a primary key, perhaps. Let's do an int ID. Let's do an int ID. And I'll say that this is an auto increment. And I'll say not null. I'll say in general that the primary key here is the ID. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to say OK. Incorrect table, there can be only one auto column. Yeah, I don't have any other auto column. Do I have any other auto column? This was not auto. This is not auto. This one is just auto. General primary key ID. There can only be incorrect table definition. There can be only one auto column. And what? Can you let me read it? And it must be defined as a key. It is defined as a key. Did I define it as a key? All right, let me just blow it away. Let me do it again. Drop table. Drop table. Let me create another table again. Let me say, what do we call it again? User to weather, right? Let me first create the ID. ID. I say not null, and it's auto increment. Yes. And then I'm going to say that is my primary key. Say OK. OK. All right, and let me create the other two columns, which were what? User ID and weather ID, right? Weather ID. And I'm going to go to the constraints. I'm going to say that this is going to be my user foreign key, which is going to map user ID, is going to map it to the table user ID. Yes? And then I'm going to add another one, which is going to be my weather foreign key, other foreign key, which is going to be mapping my weather ID, map it to the table weather ID. There it is. Okay. Let's see if that works. I'm going to say OK. Okay, that worked, right? Let's try adding some features here. Let's some data here. Let's add. Let's try this again. And this is going to be 1, 1. Say okay. Let's see if that works. That worked. I don't know why the other one didn't work. I did exactly the same thing. Anyway, let's add another one and say that Bob is following the other zip code. Okay. Say okay. There we go. All right. We just said that Alice likes these. Well, what about Alice is following both? Right. We could add that. Right. We could add another one and say that Alice is also following New York. Right. There it is. Yonkers. Right. But Bob is only following New York. Right. Alice is following Dunstable and New York, whereas Bob is only following New York. Make sense? All right. All right. So we want to be able to retrieve this from code, right? We want to be able to retrieve it and also create these things, right? I want to be able to search for zip, right? Have data, and then click on a button saying plus. I want to remember this in my table, right? Isn't that what we want to be able to do? Right. So it's just like you are following, products or recipes or sports teams or cars or whatever, right? You want to be able to remember these things. You make this relationship over here. Make sense? Right? But yes. Oh, I could have done that, right? I could have. Yeah, that would have actually been nice because it would have make sure that I'm not following the same zip code more than once, right? Right. We could have done a unique constraint amongst the combination between user ID and weather ID, right? And that would have said that needs to be unique, right? Well, I mean, if I want to add the same city more than once, why not? I like my city many times. I could put Dunstable many times. Who am I to stop them from doing that? But yes, that's a good idea, right? We could have used the combination key between these two. All right, let's do this. Let's go back, and so we need to create in our code. We need to create the ability, right, to interact with this database. Okay. So let's see. So we want to be able to retrieve, for instance, the weather for a given user, for instance, right? Maybe giving a username or giving a user ID, right? We could retrieve the weather for that. For that user. So let's do that. I'm going to say here new class weather, because this is going to be talking to the database. We're going to put it inside of a DAO, right? The main, there it is. There it is. So we're gonna create a weather DAO. We're gonna basically connect with the database, right? We're going to want to be able to select, right, insert. So the same thing we did last week, right? So I'm going to copy some of the code that we did last week. DAO. Okay, so for instance, I'm going to copy this get connection. I'm going to copy the get connection and the close connection that we had from last week. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it here in this DAO. Right? But the database is different, right? The database is different. What's the name of the database? Weather App 2. Right? What's that the name of the database? Weather App 2. Okay. Right. One thing that we did not do last week, right? Which was which we should do. How do we use it last week? We did this, right? We said weather DAO equal new weather DAO. Isn't that what we did last week? And then we started using it. Isn't that what we did? Right? Well, these DAOs, right? They're not meant to be used. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have many instances of this DAO floating around, right? Typically, these DAOs are kind of like, there should be only one DAO that talks to a database. There shouldn't be multiple DAOs around, okay? So typically, we would want to force to stop you from doing something like this, right? typically what we want is for you there be only one instance of this DAO that everybody else shares. Okay. This is a just like this this technique of putting all data access into a single class is a pattern, it's a design, it's an architectural pattern. Right? It's what we refer to as a design pattern. Right? It's a very common design pattern. This is another pattern, right, where things that are not meant to be instantiated many times, things that are meant to exist only once, right? That's another design pattern, right? It's called the Singleton design pattern. Right? It says there should be only one of these, and you should not be allowed to have more than one, right? So I'm going to enhance this DAO, right? Instead of using it like we did last week, I'm gonna change the design just a little bit, right? So to implement this design pattern, okay, the Singleton design pattern. So the way we implement the Singleton design pattern is that this weather DAO is going to have an instance of itself, right? And that's the only instance that will ever exist, right? And we will let you have it when you ask for it, okay? But if it already exists, I'm not going to reinstantiate it. I'm just going to give you something that already exists. Make sense? Right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to have a private static, meaning this is going to live throughout the life cycle of the entire application, right? It's going to be instantiated only once, and it's going to be accessible. So I'm going to say weather DAO, right? Instance. This is the instance, which is initially going to be null. Okay, and I'm not going to let you instantiate this. I'm going to stop you from instantiating it by making the constructor protected. Right? I'm going to say protected weather DAO is the default constructor. Now, we try to instantiate this. Wait, why is it letting me instantiate? Oh, because I'm inside the class. Right? Inside the class, so I can instantiate it. But outside of the class, I could not instantiate it. Right? So if you live outside, you can't instantiate it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you if you make this unavailable, the constructor, how am I ever going to use this, right? Well, I'm going to give you an entry into getting a hold of an instance of these things, right? So I'm going to say get instance. Get instance. So here what we're going to do is that if the instance is the very first time somebody asks for this DAO, meaning if it's null, then I will instantiate it. I will create the very first instance, and I will update my instance equal new weather DAO. Right? If not, next time around, it won't be null. Right? It won't be null. I'll just give you the existing instance so that everybody is using the same instance. That makes sense? Right? So this is going to say return instance. That makes sense? So I'm gonna say this is the Singleton pattern. Singleton pattern, design pattern. Right? And this is the DAO design pattern. Design pattern. Everybody okay? Everybody still with me? All right. Actually, there's more that we can do in the connection. Something that we haven't looked at yet is that here I'm creating this connection, dynamically, right? I'm asking for a connection, and then I'm destroying that connection. Right. Next week, I'm going to show you another design pattern, right? That says that actually this is very expensive, right? Of getting all these connections and then destroying it, and then get another one and then destroying it. Connections are very, very expensive, right? So another design pattern that we'll look at next week, right, is pooling these resources, right? Instead of having these connections coming and going, right? Let's pool these resources that are very expensive, right? And have them in a pool, and then we can retrieve these pools, right? One at a time when I need it, and then when I don't need it, I just put it back in the pool for someone else to reuse. That makes sense? We'll talk about that later next week. It's a data source, right? It's a data source design pattern. So we'll play around with that next week. For now, let's keep using this technique, which works just fine. Okay, so what do I want? So how do I use it? I use it like this, right? We say whether DAO dot get instance did I make it static? Oh, static. Sorry, yeah, this needs to be static because the instance itself is static, right? And I want to access it through the class, right? Not as an instance, because I'll never have an instance, right? So here's the instance. I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I'm now going to have a constructor to build this, right? Directly. So this is going to be static. Thank you. And so this is going to be get instance. There it is. Now I have the DAO, right? If I keep calling it, I'll just get always the same instance, as opposed to creating several of these instances everywhere. All right, fine. Now that I have the DAO, I want to be able to I want to create a weather, right? So I want to create an instance of these things, these weathers over here, you know, one of these, right? So I'm going to say weather is the object weather, new weather, right? And in this weather, actually in weather, you know what I would want in this weather? I would want a constructor that only supports location name and the zip. You know, that'd be nice to just have that, right? So let's do that. Let's create here another constructor that only has the zip and the location. Okay, so that in here I can just give it a zip and a location. What's the Boston zip? What zip could I use here? 0 to what? 0 to what? 115. That's Boston. Okay, there it is. So I have that. So what I want to be able to use, I want to be able to use DAO. I want to say create, right? Create and pass it weather. Okay, that's what I want. Correct? So let's create the function. So create weather. There it is. There it is. It's in weather. I don't like where I put it. Put it up here. And how do we do that? Well, that's easy, right? It's the same thing we did last week, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining this. It's just a SQL. I'm going to say insert into weather zip and location name values and then 2 question marks, right? We did that last week, right? And we get the connection equal get connection, and then from the connection we get the prepared statement. I could copy this from last week, right? Statement equal, although I guess it's a good review of what we did last week. Is this worth reviewing? Is it worth reviewing, or you have that down packed? Yes, it's worth reviewing. No, it's not worth reviewing. Okay, yes, all right. Connection, so prepare the statement with the SQL, and I need to include that. So the SQL statement. Oh, sorry. I guess this throws an exception, right? This throws an exception, so I'm going to add try catch. I'm going to populate these 2 values from where? From the weather, right? The weather object has that, right? So I'm going to say statement dot set string. The first one is from the weather dot get zip, right? And the second one is from the location, right? So statement dot set string to weather dot get location name. Yep. Oh no, not short. What? String. Now that I said it, I can execute. Yes, I can execute. So I can say statement dot execute dot execute. Okay, that executes. So let's test it. Let's test it. All right. So let's run this. Let's run this. Let's run this. Let's see if it compiles. Let's see if this blows up. I think it blew up. Okay. What does it not like? What is the problem? It says, oh, the driver, right? We never We never added the jar file for MySQL driver, right? We need to do that. Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. So to do that, we're gonna drag the MySQL driver, which I have it somewhere here, JDBC, and it's this one over here. I'm gonna drag it over to my lib directory, and I'm gonna add it to my build path, and add jar, which is in my local directory, webinf lib. There it is. I say OK. It's OK. So I'm going to hopefully the server will restart. Come on, restart. That will hopefully will redeploy. Maybe it did. Oh, okay. Well, we don't need to redeploy, right? Because we're running local, right? We're running from the standard. From the standalone, right? So let's try that again. DAO. Let's run that. Okay, it didn't blow up. Okay, let's go to the database and make sure. Let's see if it included it. So I'm going to say F5. There it is. Boston is in there. Okay, and nobody's following Boston. And nobody's following Boston. Typically, a user would log in, right? Would search Boston, and then click Add, and then what it would do is that it would see if Boston already exists. Right? If it doesn't exist, it would insert Boston, yes? Right? And then it would insert into the user to whether saying that this user is following Boston. Right? It would have to do like a select to see if it's there. It's like an upsert, right? If it's there, don't insert it. If it's not there, then insert it. Right? And then either way, in both cases, I need to update this table to map. Make sense? Right? So we need to be able to search. We need to be able to, for a particular user, we need to be able to retrieve the weather for that particular user. Yes? Okay. We also need, what else? We need to check to see if that weather already exists. Right? We want to check to see if that weather already exists. For now, let's create all the low-level stuff, right? That allows us to create all these things. So private, for instance, we need to be able to retrieve a single weather, right? Retrieve a single weather. So let's see. We can say private weather, right? Select one, and given a particular ID. Or how would we want to retrieve it? We would retrieve it maybe by zip code or by ID. Right. This is where the use case analysis would help me. Right. The use case analysis would say, well, how do you want to be able to retrieve these things? Right. You want to retrieve it by zip code. You want to retrieve. How do you want to retrieve it? Right. So use case analysis would drive the SQL statements that I would need. Okay. I'm assuming that I might need something, look it up by zip code, right? Also notice that my problem as well is that I'm kind of designing this from the bottom up, right? I'm kind of designing this from the bottom up. I don't know if you're going to be searching for ID. I don't know if you're going to be searching by zip code because I don't know what the use cases are. I don't know what the UI wants to do. I don't know how the user wants to use my database. Yes? So usually it's the use case analysis that drives, right, the design of the rest of the application, right? Okay. So why don't we focus a little bit on what the UI might look like, right? Perhaps I want to create a user, right? So let's create a user. Let's go back here and create a page that would allow me to maybe register. Also, because some of you were asking me, well, you're going to have all these logins of users, right? Creating accounts. How am I going to do that? So let's do that, right? Let's create a simple application, a simple page that would allow me to log in and register. So I would want, for instance, a JSP page that is maybe a login page, right? And maybe I would want maybe a register page that will allow me to create a brand new user. So maybe have like a register page. If they successfully log in, what should they see? Well, I think that once you log in, the first thing that you should see is all the locations that right? All the locations that you have added, right? That are in your database. Yes. Okay. All right. So let's and if you want to view the weather for that particular place, you would select it, and perhaps it would go to some other page that would show the details for that weather, right? So I want a page maybe that lists all the my weathers, right? So I want a JSP that says, list my weather locations, right? And maybe another page that shows show weather for location JSP. Okay, for that particular location. Okay. All right. So let's look at the login. Let's go into login, and let's do a div here. Div, and in here we're going to put maybe h1 saying login, and maybe I'm going to put here an input field where something that says username, and then maybe put an input field. Name is username, okay, and maybe a password. Input name equal password. Maybe you can say type password so you can't see. Okay, let's run this, see how it looks on the server. Let's see what it looks like. The server, okay, I'll restart the server. Restarts the server. It looks awful. It looks awful, huh? Well, I need a button here. Don't I need a button? Button that says login. I'm going to make this a little prettier. I'm sorry. I am going to add here, just very quick, I'm going to add a simple CSS. I believe I did this last week. I don't remember. Did I add Bootstrap last week to make it a little prettier? Okay, let me do that real quick. I'm going to go here, and I go to my downloads. I'll go to my Bootstrap. So this is a CSS. It's very common amongst developers that makes things look very professional, very easily, right? So I'm going to drag it here into my CSS. I'm going to copy it, and you can download Bootstrap from getbootstrap.com. Okay, you can download it here, download Bootstrap, and then you can copy the CSS locally. Anyway, to use Bootstrap from your page, you would say something like link href css bootstrap.css rel equal style sheet. Also, this makes it very, very easy to create phone applications for anybody that wants to make a phone application. I'm still pitching it to some students. Nobody has bit the idea to create a phone application. This would make it very, very easy to create a phone application. All right, so let's see what this looks like. Maybe hopefully it'll look a little better. Let me refresh. All right, looks a little better. Let me use a real browser. At least the font's a little prettier. The font's a little prettier. Let me just paint a couple things here. Where it is? Where's my? I'm gonna put this. There's the container. I can add a couple of classes here to make it a little prettier. Container class just makes it so that it adds some border at the edges, right? It centers it, makes it a little bit more centered. The input fields, if you color this to be a form element, a form control. I'm used to Visual Studio that it parses the CSS and it auto completes. I'm doing it from my head now. Let's do that. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, it looks a little better, right? And in my login, my button, I can paint that too. I can say this is a button, and it's a primary button. primary button, and I want it to be take the whole screen, so it looks like a phone application. Button block. Right, if I do that and I go back, that looks a little better, right? It's almost like the beginning of a login page for a phone. Okay, if anybody wants to do a phone application. Anyway, so what do I want to do? I want to be able to click here and go to a form and check to see if I'm logged in, right? If this user actually exists. Okay. So I want to put this inside of a form. So let's put this inside of a form. And the action will be that I'm going to go to, what's the name of the application? Weather app, right? Weather app / login. Right, and I'm going to put the form at the bottom. All right, so somebody is going to, this is going to be sent to something in the back end that's going to check to see if I'm logged in. Okay, and if it's successful, it'll go to the next page. Otherwise, it'll stay in the same page. Okay? All right. To do that, how did we do it last week? I think we used the same page as controller, right? That's considered to be bad practice. I'm going to show you a nicer, cleaner way to do this, and it's to use servlets instead, right? Unless some people are using Spring MVC. You know, if you're using Spring MVC, you're free to use Spring. If you know how to use Spring MVC, use Spring MVC. Okay, don't use servlets. But for those that don't know Spring MVC, this is the simplest way that you can go into this without having to learn a new framework. Okay, Spring MVC is a pretty large framework that makes some of this automagic. But again, you would have to buy into that framework. And I don't want to force you into any particular framework. So this is the simplest way without having to go into any particular framework. This is the out-of-the-box, you know, plain Java solution, right? That works anywhere without having to install any other framework. Okay. So anyway, so what I'm going to do, so this is a user, so this is a kind of like a user thing, right? I'm going to create another class. I'm going to create a servlet. A servlet is just a Java class that allows to execute when a URL happens. Here's a URL. Execute this. Execute this piece of code. Execute this piece of Java code. Right. Notice that what's that URL I'm talking about? Well, let's say if I refresh this and I say here user1 and password1, I say login. That's the URL. There it is. That's the URL. I want some Java code to execute when this URL executes. Yes? If somebody types this URL. Understand? So I want Java code to execute. So how do I do that? How do I do that? Let me go back. Right now, there is no Java code, so it's complaining. So there's nothing mapped to that URL. I don't have anything to do there. What do I do? So you do that with what's called a servlet. Okay, it's basically, here's Java code that will execute when this URL happens. Everything okay? All right, very easy. So I'm going to say here, new servlet. Okay, I'm going to put it in a package. It's going to be very similar to this package. It's going to be edu.neu.cs5200, but it's not going to be whether it's going to be user, right? It's going to be like these are user-specific things. Okay? So the class name is going to be login servlet. Okay, I'm going to say next. I'm going to map it. What did I map it to? Just login, right? So that's the name I'm going to give it, and it's going to be mapped. Notice it's going to be mapped to /login. Yes? It's going to be mapped to that. Next, I don't want any of this. I don't want any of that. I don't want that. I don't want that. I want just a service. And say finish. This is the simplest way. There it is. I'm just going to remove. I'm going to remove all this that we don't need. There it is. So what's going to happen is that when that URL, when it sees this URL, this method is going to execute. That method is going to be whatever I put in there is going to execute, right? So let's put here hello world. System.out. Println hello from login servlet. Okay? Right? One more thing before this actually works. I'm going to need to map it in my configuration here. Normally this would be automatic, but it's not doing it automatically. I'm not sure why, so I'm going to do it by hand. You go here and you say, I want a new servlet. In the XML, you have to configure it. You have to say, okay, fine. What's the name of the servlet? It's called login servlet. You can give it any name. And I need to say what class is implementing that servlet. It says, okay, well, it's called the, what do you call it? Login servlet. Is that what I called it? This has to match the class. This is a name, a local name, right? It's a local name that I can use it to keep configuring it. And then the map, once I declare the servlet, servlet, I need to now map it and say, I want that servlet to execute when this URL happens. Okay? So I'm going to create and add another child here, and I want to add a mapping, servlet mapping. So first I declare the servlet, now I'm declaring a mapping. Right, here's the mapping, and I say, okay, which servlet are you mapping? The one called servlet. Okay, this one. It's the same name as this. Copy, paste, copy, paste. And then what URL pattern do you want to, when do you want to run? I want to run when you see /login. Okay? That's it. I'm going to save that, and the server should pick that up, maybe. Come on. I might need to restart the server, actually. Yeah, let me restart the server. Oh, let me see if it actually picked it up. No, it didn't pick it up. Let me restart the server. I'm going to stop the server. You can say restart. Oops. Server, blah, blah, blah. Server at local fail. Why? What is that? Let me stop it. It stopped. Do I have another server running? Maybe I have a server running. Click start. What is it complaining about? Details. Blah, blah, blah. In the console, what did it say? I think the console said something. A child, blah, 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 da, 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 da. Start. What's it saying? Catalina, life. The servlets named login are both mapped to the URL login, which is not permitted. WebXML at servlet. Oh, I know why. Because I think I have another application that maps the same thing, right? It has the same map. It says, well, if you're going to have these two applications running, I'm not going to know which one do you mean, right? So I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it to something else. I'm going to change it to, I'll call it, let's call it logging action. Okay, call login action. I'm going to save that. And my login page is going to point to, instead of login, it's going to say login action. Okay. And now I'm going to restart. Let's see if that worked. Okay, that didn't seem to complain. Okay, let me go back. I'm going to refresh my page and say user1 p1. Okay, it didn't complain. Let's see at the browser. There it is. Hello from login servlet. Yes? So I'm in the servlet. Yes? And from within this servlet, what could I do? I could hit the database, right? I could say, it says, is this user and password, is that valid? Right? Before I do that, notice that the username and password are on the clear. Right? We don't want that. We don't want this URL and password to be shown. So instead, I'm going to change the method. I'm going to change the method to be post. Meaning it's going to go in the body of the server of the HTTP request, so it's not going to be in the clear, right? Also, if this were using HTTPS, right, the browsers would encrypt the request, so the password would not be plain text, right? We don't have an HTTPS server here, so it's still going to be clear text. So somebody could sniff out the passwords if somebody's listening in, right? Because it's not encrypted. But anyway, at least I don't want it to see in the URL. Okay, so let's try that. Let me go back. Let me clear this. Let me refresh. So this is user 2, P2. And say login. So okay, there it is. So from the servlet, I want to get a hold of the username and password. To do that, let's retrieve the username and password from the request. We do it the same way we do it from the JSP. Same way, right? You can say string username from the request. You can say get parameter username. That's the name we gave it in the URL, right? And we're going to retrieve also the password and say equal request dot get parameter password. Okay. And we can say in the cout we can say hello from so, and then make sure that we have username and then password. Okay, right. So hopefully that will recompile, and let's try it again. I'm just going to refresh. I'm just going to refresh. It says, "Do you want to resubmit the form?" It says, "Yes, resubmit the form." And here, notice that I have the username and password. There it is. You see that in the servlet? Okay. Fine. Now that I have the username and password, I need something that verifies that this user actually exists. Yes. So I'm going to need to have a user DAO. I'm going to have to have a user DAO that selects a user by username and password and returns an instance of a user if it finds it, or null if it doesn't find it. Make sense? Right? All right, let's do that. Let's create a DAO. Let's create a user here. New user DAO class. Now notice how now it is my UI who's driving the design, as opposed to creating all these DAOs, right, with all these selects that I don't know if I'm going to need, right? It's better to do a top-down design, right, that says my UI is driving, right, my requirements drive the UI drives the design of the select statements and that I'm going to need, right, in the DAO. Make sense? Right? So I'm going to create a class here. I'm going to call it user DAO instead of user, and say main, yes. And what do we need here? I'm going to copy from my other DAO. I'm going to copy this, which is common. I should, you know what we should do? Perhaps have like a base DAO. Maybe like a base DAO from which we can inherit, right? That'd be nice. That'd be nice, right? Maybe you should do that in your projects, right? Have a base DAO, right? And inherit from that, so that you don't have to copy and paste this over and over. Okay. So I'm going to copy and paste it just for time's sake. But I don't want to see this copied over and over in your projects. You know, declare a base DAO from which you can inherit. All right, so let's go here. I'm gonna paste it here. And what do we need to do? We need to do a public. We want to find a user, select by username, password. Okay, maybe there is. I like to be very verbose. And here's the string username, string password. Obviously, the passwords in the database would probably also be encrypted, right? Right. So typically, what you would do, you have to encrypt the password to be able to compare it against the password that is in the database, right? So we're not doing any of that, right? So in the database, the passwords we're storing it in the clear, right? In a real environment, all these passwords would also be encrypted here, so that even a admin, right, that has access to the database will not be able to look at your password, because I have no idea what your password is, right? The only way to log in right, or change your password is, I forgot, provide a new password which will be encrypted and then stored here encrypted, right? Okay. Okay, we're not doing any of that. So here's user. User doesn't exist. We have to create a new user class. We're going to create it. The only things that we're going to need here, we're going to need maybe a private string username and private string password. Okay, maybe an ID, private int ID. And for now, let's just keep these three things. Right? Let's create here real quick the setters and getters. Select all, and the constructor with all of them. Very good. We'll do one with just username and password with no ID, and then one last one with nothing, default constructor. Deselect all, and OK. Okay, now that I have all three, I can go back to my DAO. Right? Now I have a user, right? And I'm gonna, by default, I'm gonna return null if I didn't find anything. Right? If there was no user with that username and password, I'm just gonna return null. Right? If I do find it, how? I'm gonna do a string SQL. It's gonna do what? I'm gonna say, select from user, right? Where username is equal to whatever you passed and password is equal to whatever you passed as an argument. Yes, right? And so we're going to get the connection. Connection equal get connection. I forgot in the other one to close the connection, right? In the weather DAO, I forgot to close the connection, right? Naughty, right? So okay, so I'm going to do a prepared statement. I can't spell today. Statement. Let me include prepared statement from the connection dot prepared statement from the SQL, and I'm going to populate those two question marks. And in here, I'm going to say, statement dot set string, the first one with the username, and the second one with the password. Yes, and then I'm going to do a query, right, in a results set results equals statement dot execute query, right? I'm going to include results set, and I'm going to check, right, if results has next, right? If there is a result if there is at least one record. Right, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to create the user object. I'm going to create the user object, right? So I'm going to say user equal. Well, I don't have the username and password. Let me read the user. Let me read the whole data. Actually, for now, I could just return an empty user. As long as I don't return null, right? It'll be all good, right? But it's good if I retrieve it. Presumably, it's the same username and password that I passed. Otherwise, there would not be a record, obviously, right? So I'm going to create a user equal new user that has the same username and password that you passed, obviously, and I'm going to return user. All right, so it's something other than null, right? Something other than null. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So I'm going to go back to my. Let me try it out. Let me try it out. Oh, this user DAO, same thing, right? It would need to be a singleton, okay? But I'm not going to do it for time, but it would have to be in singleton as well, okay? So that's what I would expect in your design, right? It would have to be a singleton. I'm pressed with time, so instead, welcome. We're almost done. So I'm going to say user DAO. So here's the DAO, new user DAO. And I'm going to get a hold of a user from DAO.select user by name. And I believe I have Alice, right? Alice, and I believe the password was also Alice. Was it? Was it? Right? And so I want to say, well, system.out.println. print ln user, right? And I'm going to run this, see if it prints out null. Let's see what it comes back, right? I'm going to run this as a standalone Java application. It comes back. It did return null. Why did it return null? You have an error in your SQL. Oh, I have an error in my SQL. Oh, select star. Duh. Okay, select everything. Let's try that again. Oh yeah, there it is. It's not null, right? And if instead I put in the a bad password and I run this again, it returns null. Okay? All right. Go back to my servlets. All right, let's go back to our servlets. Let's go back to our servlets. Where is it? Servlet. My login servlet. I have my username name and password. I'm going to create a user DAO. New user DAO. Instead, this would have to be an instance, right? This would be a singleton. Please don't do this, right? You would have a singleton, and then it's the same singleton throughout the whole life cycle of the application, right? Instead, here I would have to instantiate it every time I log in, right? That's expensive, right? Instead of having that one instance throughout the life cycle of the application. Make sense, right? Okay, now that I have the DAO, I can say DAO select user by name. Here's the username name, right? Here's a user, right? And depending on this, I'm going to say, well, if user equal null, what should I do? Well, if it's null, I should just redirect you back to the login page, right? So I can say response dot send redirect back to slash login.jsp. So send you back to login.jsp, right? Otherwise, I'll let you through, right? Maybe I want to put an error message or something, right? But we're not going to do that. Actually, we could, right? No, I'm not going to do it here. I don't have time. Instead, if it's okay, meaning if it's not null, I'm going to forward you to the next page, right? I'm going to say response dot send redirect to, what's the other page called? My list my weather locations. Yes, so that's my JSP. Right, which right now it doesn't have anything. I'll just put here a h1 list of my weather locations. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to try this out. The login part, the login piece. Let's see. Where's our page? Let's go back. I'm going to say Alice. Let me close that. Let me put this here, see if this blows up over here. I'm going to say login. Okay, let's see. What did it do? Okay, look at this. Yeah, we forwarded to the right place, but we're missing weather app. That's what we're missing. All right, we're missing. Okay, so it's okay. Let's go back to our servlets. Where's our servlets? Login servlets. We just need to prepend weather. What is it? Weather app slash. Now, typically this would not be the case, right? Here, because we're running a Tomcat and we want to be able to host many applications. Right? The default is that this we call the context of the application, right? By default, we don't use a context when we're hosting it for real in production, right? But since Tomcat here is configured to host many applications on my development box, right? We want to be able to distinguish one application from the next, right? So by default, Tomcat is configured to use the name of the application as its root context, right? So by default, this would work, right, without the context, right? But again, we have to make sure we deal with the development environment, right, as we're developing. Right? Anyway, so let's hopefully that worked. Let me go back. Try it again. So Alice and Alice, log in. All right, it goes back. That works, right? If I go back instead, type something else, and I log in, it stays in login.jsp, right? If I type Alice, Alice, it goes in, and it comes in here. Okay, so what do we do here? Here we want to select what? The weather locations for that particular user, right? We need to retrieve from our database, right? From this mapping table, say, okay, I know the user, right? And perhaps I have either I have their user ID, or maybe I have their username, okay? And then I can use that to look up in my mapping table which weather locations are they following, okay? So I need to kind of I need to join, right, these three tables where it says where the username is whatever, right, and where there is a mapping between the user to weather that maps to the user and maps to the weather, right, and retrieve the weather piece. Make sense? Right. So we need to do that. Notice that when we get to list of my weather locations, I have absolutely no idea of the ID or the or username, right? I've lost the context of the conversation. So I know you logged in, but now I don't know who you are. Okay, this is common in web applications. HTTP is a stateless protocol, right? There's no way for the server to distinguish one request from the other, right? This could be anybody, right? So we need to maintain that state. There's two ways to maintain the state. One of them is to use a session on the server, session service. I'm not going to go into that. It's an involved topic. Also, it's not very scalable in that if what it needs to do, the server needs to maintain a session for every user that logs in, right? That means that the database needs to maintain information in RAM or even in a file system or even in a database, right? And it might work fine for 100 users, right? But if you scale and now you become thousands of users, well, now you're asking me to maintain all this RAM, right, all this file system for this many users. It doesn't scale very well. Okay. Instead, another alternative, right, is what it's called a stateless session. I'm sorry, a stateless application where it is not the server who maintains the state, it is the browser who maintains the state, right? The browser will identify itself on every request. It says, oh, it's me again, right? And I can provide, says, hey, it's me, the username, right? Alice. Right? If the browser could, keep passing, right, the state, right, along in the conversation, the server can say, oh, it's you again, right? And I can fetch all the information for you. I can distinguish you. Does that make sense? That makes sense? Okay. All right, so the way we're going to do that, right, over here, instead of doing a send redirect, what we're going to do, you know what, in this select, what we should have done, notice that I use the same username and password, but guess what? I also have the ID, don't I? Because I just queried the database, and I also, not only do I have the username and password, obviously, right, but I also have the ID, so I should return the ID, at least that, right? I should do maybe results dot get int from a column called ID. Now that I have the ID, I can actually pass this as an argument, as a parameter to the ID, right? So now my object actually had that, the object that I returned not only has the username and password, which I knew already, but now I have the ID, right? That I have with the record that this matches, right? Which I could use in a select statement later on, right? It would be useful, right? Anyway, so I retrieve that. I go back to my servlet. So what I'm going to do, instead of doing a plain send redirect, I'm going to do something a little more sophisticated, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this user, I'm going to pass it along to the next page. Right? I'm going to pass it along to the next page, right? As part of the request, right? Meaning The request started in login.jsp. Yes. It flowed. Can you say flowed? No. It flew. It flows through the servlet. Yes. The request is not done yet. Right? Not until the server responds. The request is still live. Right? The HTTP request is still live. Right? It goes through the servlet. If I do a send redirect, then it will be done, right? Because I'm using response. Response completes and stops the request, and it responds back to the client, right? Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to stop the request. I'm just going to forward it along to the next page. That makes sense? Meaning, all the information that I already have accumulated, I'm going to pass it along to the next in line. Who's the next in line? The weather, the list my weather location.jsp. I'm going to pass it along in the request, right? So look what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to put in the request, I'm going to add an attribute. I'm going to say set attribute user, the user object. Meaning, I'm going to pass the user object along to the next page so that the other page can say, oh, that's who I'm talking to. Okay? All right? And the way I'm going to do is I'm not going to stop the response. I'm just going to forward the request. Right? And the way I do that is I'm going to ask for a request. I want to dispatch the request to the next one in line. So dispatcher from the request, meaning find get request dispatcher the page, this page over here, this page over here. I want to dispatch to that page. Find it. So find the page to I want to forward. And this request dispatch, I need to include that. Change to create. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, it's that one. And then I want to forward. I want to say dispatcher dot forward the request that I have and the response that I have. Meaning, just continue. Just forward it. Right? It's going to forward it. All right. Let's try this again. Let's see if I broke this beyond repair. Let's go back and refresh this, right? And let's see if it blows up over here. So it says Alice, log in. All right, it still works. It still works. But now, in my list, my weather. List my weather, I can retrieve the user object from the request. Right? I can say, hey user, from the request, get the parameter, not parameter, the attribute that the other guy passed me. They named it user. Yes. Retrieve it. I need to include that the user. The user is where? The user is, where is the user? Is here, right? So user. I need the I need to import that. It's import equal. What is it? edu.cs5200.user.star. Okay, that should work. Oh. Okay, now it's happy. And I need to cast this. Oh, I don't have that here. I cast it. So and I'm going to system.out.println user.get username. I'm going to print that. Also, I'm going to print it to the page, right? I'm going to say user.get username. Okay, let's do that again. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to refresh this, right? So it's just going to post this again. Say yes, I want to post it again, and say continue. There it is. There's Alice. So now the page knows, right? The page knows who, and notice that this did not involve the server. The server has absolutely no idea that this happened, right? The server didn't have to remember anything about us, right? It didn't have to create a session for us, right? This scales much better, right? This is very easily could accommodate thousands of users because I am not asking the server to remember me, right? The session is being completely maintained on the client side, right? Make sense? Right? This is a stateless application as opposed to a stateful application, right? All right, I only have a few minutes. All right, so what do we need to do here? We need to what? We need to retrieve. We need to retrieve all the weather, right, for this user. Notice that I also have the ID, right? I also have the ID, right? Because ID. If I refresh this and if I redo this again, there it is, 1. I have the ID 1, right? So I could say here, I could say, what I would want to be able to do is have a DAO, right, that says, hey, retrieve all the weather, right, for this particular user. So I can display it here, right? So I can say, I would want something like, list weather, from some DAO, some weather DAO, weather DAO dot, get select from user ID, right? So I provide the user ID, which is user.getID, right? And then I would iterate over this list of weather, right, displaying all the weather. That makes sense? Again, notice how this is top-down, right? Design. It is what I need. I'm going to go and build it, right? It's driving what I need, right? It's a top-down design. I believe I need list, so I'm going to import list here. That's in java.util.star. And what else? I need a weather DAO. That's under here. A weather DAO. That's under this package. The package, and then this is, where is it? Here, right? And I need that dot star. Okay. I just don't have this select from user. I don't have that, right? So let's create that. Let's create that. Oh wait. Weathers. Okay. And weather DAO, where is that? That's weather DAO. Other DAO equal new. Wait, is that? Did I do that one right? Yeah, I did an instance, right? I did instance. So weather DAO is equal. No, I can't instantiate it. How do I do that? I do weather DAO. It's a singleton. Get instance. There it is. Right. That is correctly implemented. Yes, using a singleton. It just doesn't have that function, that method. So let me copy that function, the method, so I can implement it. Let me go to my weather DAO and implement it. Let's see. All right, there it is. I'm gonna. So this returns what? A public list of weather, right? With an int ID. I need to import list. Hello. Where are you? Come on. Back. Oh, woke up. All right. So this is gonna, by default, it's gonna return. Now let me create an empty list. Right. I'm gonna create an empty list of weather. Right. So that's gonna be. I'm gonna call it WS. I'm gonna say new array list. Weather, right? I need to import array list, Java util, and then I'm going to just return WS, which is by default is an empty list. Yes, it's an empty list. Okay. So I'm going to get the string. The SQL is going to be what? Let's see. I want to select star. Well, let's do it here first. Let's do it in Toad. Let's do it in Toad to see if we can get. What do we want? Let's see. Which weather do we want? If we get Alice, we want which ones? we want Dunstable and Yonkers, right? Because Alice is here. I think user ID is 1 and 1, right? And it's listening to 1 and 2, right? So the SQL, build SQL, edit SQL, right? So let's create a SQL here. I'm going to say, right? So I'm going to say, I can't make this bigger. I'm sorry. Select star from user. Okay, let's try that. And if I execute it, it returns all the users. There it is, right? Really, I want to select all the weather. That's what I want, right? All the weather. That's what I want. But I don't want all of it. I only want these two, right? So how do I do that? If I know the user ID, let's see. I want to select from weather. Not everything, right? Let's see, weather, and then I want to select from. I want to join it with user to weather, with other, and user. And I want to filter. By. It changes so small. I don't know how to change the size. I don't know if the other folks in Seattle can see that. It's so small. So anyway, what I want to do is say, okay, well, I know the user ID. I can say where, right? User.id is equal to 1, right? I know the ID. Let's see, and what else? Well, there's a mapping of that user ID to what? To the user to weather user ID, right? That maps, right? Those have to map, and weather with other.id maps to user to weather.weather ID. Right? Does that make sense? Right? So I'm filtering. Since I don't want all the weather, right? I only want the weather where I have that information, right? Where I know the user ID is 1, that it maps to the weather to this, right? Maps to where the user ID is 1, these two. I want these two, right? That one and that one, right? Now that I know these two, I have the weather ID, which is 1 and 2, right? Which maps to the weather ID 1 and 2, which is Dunstable and Yonkers. You see that? Right? All right, so let me try that and refresh. Oops, what I do? Did I misspell something? Weather from blah 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 blah. Did I misspell this? Are these not called that way? User ID, weather ID. Is this misspelled? I don't think so. Dot weather ID. How about this one? Dot user ID. Okay, user ID is that user ID equal blah blah blah. And. Do you see any misspelling? I don't see anything wrong. All right, it worked, right? So what do I want? I don't want everything. I only want what? I want the weather ID, the location name, and the zip. Right? Those are the only things that I want. So I'll just grab the zip, and that's unambiguously from where? From the weather table, right? So I don't have to prefix it with a table name. Yes. If I want the location name, there it is. I don't have to prefix it because it is unambiguously from that table. But what about the ID? I want the weather ID. I don't want any other ID. Notice that I need to prefix it that, right? Because it's ambiguous. I don't know which one, right? And there it is. So if I rerun that, I have those three things. Okay? All right, great. So I have this string. I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to paste it over here. It's a pretty long string. Pretty long string. I forget in Java how you break strings. Does anyone remember? I don't remember. Anyway, I don't care. So I'm just gonna just make it a very long string. I don't have time to. Oops. There we go. Okay, and the values, notice that the only parameter here, the only parameter is this here. Isn't that right? The user ID. That's what changes, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a semicolon there. I'm going to say, okay, now I get a connection from let's say equal get connection, and now that I have the connection, I can say prepared statement connection dot prepared statement from the SQL, and then I'm going to I need to put a try catch around that, and then in here I'm going to populate the ID. I'm going to say statement dot set int the index is 1 and the value is ID, and then I'm going to get a result. I'm going to execute, right? I'm going to say result set, and there might be more than one, right? There might be more than one. So result set results equal statement dot executes query. There it is, and I'm going to include the result set. Results is not here already. Okay, and there might be several, so I'm going to do a while results.next, right? And as I iterate, I'm going to retrieve those three things, right? The ID, what else? The location name and the zip, right? So I'm going to say int the ID is going to be results dot get int from ID. I'm going to retrieve the zip results dot get string from zip, and the location name from results dot get string location name. Right now that I have all three, I can create. I'm not going to. Okay, ID. I already have a variable called ID. I'm not going to redeclare it. I'm going to create a new weather. And do I have a weather that takes all three things here? Let's see. Do I have weather? Okay, we don't need that anymore. We don't need that anymore. We don't need that anymore. No, we don't need that. Condition. I guess we need condition. Do we? We don't need that. We don't need that. Okay, we have. Do we have weather? Where's weather? Okay, there it is. Do we have a constructor that only takes those three things? Do we? Let's see. We have one that takes zip and location. We don't have one that takes just those three. So let me create a constructor for just those three. Generate construction just from deselect all, only the ID, the zip, and the location name. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to go back to my my weather DAO, and I'm going to create my new weather new weather that takes into the ID, the zip, and the location name. Everybody okay? Now that I have an instance, what is it complaining about? Oh, I never saved weather. Save. Okay, now that I have the weather, I'm going to add it to my list, which I call the WS, add weather, add weather. And so at the end of this loop, I will have the list of weathers. Yes? Okay? And I'm going to return WS. There it is. So I have WS. So who's going to receive that? Who called this? Who called this? My list. This guy called it, right? Right? Why is it not? Come on, reparse it. Okay, there it is. I have weather. Yes. So I want to list that in my JSP. Now I have, presumably, I have a list. Yes. So let me. I need some kind of for loop that is going to iterate over all those weathers, right? Weather in weathers with others. Right, and I'm going to do system.out.println weather.getLocation name. Okay, so let's try that. Let's try that, and I'm going to go back here, and I'm just going to refresh my page. I'm going to refresh my page, and this will blow up. Yeah, it worked. There's my Dunstable and there's my Yonkers. Okay. So what I could do is display that in the application. Where's my list? Okay, here. Instead of displaying it in the console, right? What I could do is go maybe put make a table out of this, right? So I can go to HTML for a second, right? Start a table, okay, and maybe close this with HTML, and then go back to Java. And instead of printing it, what I could do is go back to HTML for a second, and go back to Java. And here I could create several table rows, right? I could create several table columns, maybe just two things, perhaps the location name, and print here the location name, right? The weather dot get zip, right? And then the weather, the location name, right? Location name. There it is, right? So if I go back and redo this and I rerun it, there it is. I have my zip code and my locations. Yes? I could make this a little prettier if I include log in this link. Right? If I include this link, this Bootstrap link, and I include that in my list here, and include that link here, and I put this whole thing in a div whose class is container. Right, this will look just a little prettier. Okay, and if I paint my table with a class table, this will look even prettier. There it is. So it's a table. It's a nice table, right? And the things that I could do is maybe I could what I would like to be able to do. So I don't need Alice anymore. Well, I'm printing the Alice. What I'd like to be able to do now is have a button here that if I click on that button, it goes to the details page, right? For that particular weather location. Yes. And for that, I'll leave it to next week, right? We'll play around with that next week. Or maybe you could do it, right? Or perhaps maybe I could finish this off later on this week, and I'll post the whole solution, right, on GitHub, and then you should feel comfortable perhaps downloading this and tweaking it for your own thing. What I want you to do is not focus so much on how to do all this. I've done this all for you. Is to focus on what those tables look like, right? What those mappings look like, what those DAOs look like, right? And then you can use this as a template and copy and paste here and there, and not have to learn all this, right? With the hope that you learned it here in class, you saw me do it in live, right? You just have to adjust it for your own project. Okay? All right. So let's leave it here. I need to have another class that I need to prepare for. Thank you. Seattle. I'm sorry. Any questions from Seattle? I'm sorry, I didn't ask. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this, and if there's anyone else that wants to join later on, you're welcome to join. Okay? All right, see you in a bit.